The disguised millionaire couldn't believe his eyes when he read the little note the 7-year-old waitress handed him. Her innocent words hit him so deep that he started crying right there in the restaurant. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Jonathan Reed adjusted the worn baseball cap lower over his eyes, the fabric rough against his perfectly manicured fingers. The 30-year-old tech mogul had traded his usual $1,000 suits for a faded flannel shirt and jeans with actual holes. Not the designer kind that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Standing outside Miller's Diner in the heart of small-town Millbrook, Ohio, he felt like an actor preparing for the role of his lifetime. For 3 years, Jonathan's assistant had handled every human interaction. His penthouse elevator opened directly into his office. His meals arrived via private chef. His dates came pre-screened by matchmaking services that charged 6 figures. He realized with startling clarity that he hadn't had a genuine conversation with an ordinary person in. He couldn't even remember when. The idea had struck him during another sleepless night in his Manhattan tower, surrounded by awards and newspaper clippings declaring him America's most eligible bachelor and the golden boy of tech. But what did any of it mean if he felt empty? If every smile directed his way carried a price tag? So here he was, in a town where his company's logo wasn't plastered on every billboard, where his face hadn't graced magazine covers, where his name meant nothing. He'd driven 12 hours in a rented Honda Civic, the most ordinary car he could find, to become nobody, just Jonathan, not Jonathan Reed, CEO of Reed Innovations. Not Jonathan Reed, worth $847 million, simply Jonathan. The dinner bell above the diner's door chimed as he stepped inside, its sound warm and welcoming. The smell of fresh coffee and homemade pie immediately enveloped him. Checkered tablecloths, vinyl booths patched with duct tape, and a counter that had seen decades of conversations. Everything his sterile world wasn't. "Sit anywhere you'd like, honey," called a weary voice from behind the counter. A woman in her 40s, thin and pale, managed a tired smile while wiping down glasses with hands that trembled slightly. But it wasn't the woman who caught Jonathan's attention. It was the tiny figure weaving between tables with a grace that seemed impossible for someone so young. Golden curls bounced as she moved, and despite the oversized apron that nearly dragged on the floor, she carried herself with surprising confidence. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old. The little girl approached his booth with eyes that sparkled like morning sunlight. "Hi there, I'm Lucy. What can I get started for you today?" Her voice carried a sweetness that made Jonathan's chest tighten unexpectedly. Jonathan paused, remembering his role. "Just coffee for now, please." "Coming right up," Lucy beamed, her smile so genuine it almost hurt to witness. "Mama makes the best coffee in all of Ohio. You'll see." As Lucy hurried away, Jonathan watched her interact with other customers. She knew everyone's name, asked about grandchildren, remembered who liked their eggs over easy. This child, who should have been playing with dolls or watching cartoons, was working with a dedication that put his own employees to shame. When she returned with his coffee, the cup rattled slightly in her small hands, but her smile never wavered. "There you go, sir. Can I get you some of Mama's famous apple pie? It's still warm." Something in her eagerness, her desperate hope for a sale, made Jonathan's throat constrict. "Yes," he managed. "That sounds perfect." For the next hour, he watched Lucy work. She never complained, never showed frustration when customers ignored her or spoke rudely. She simply continued serving with that radiant smile, her small legs carrying her tirelessly around the diner. When Jonathan finally asked for his check, Lucy approached with something hidden behind her back. "Here you go, sir," she said, placing the bill on the table. Then, with a conspiratorial whisper, she added, "And this is for you." She slipped a small piece of paper beside his cup, and hurried away before he could respond. Jonathan's hands shook as he unfolded the note. In careful, childish handwriting, Lucy had written, "Thank you for being kind to me today. Most grown-ups don't really see me. You looked at me like I mattered. That made my heart happy. I hope your heart is happy too. Lucy." The words blurred as tears he hadn't shed in years began to fall. In his world of calculated interactions and strategic relationships, a 7-year-old girl working in a small-town diner had just shown him what he'd lost, what he'd never actually had. And as Lucy waved goodbye from across the diner, Jonathan Reed realized that everything he thought he knew about life was about to change forever. Jonathan couldn't bring himself to leave Miller's diner. Something about Lucy's note had shattered a wall inside him that he hadn't even known existed. He folded the precious piece of paper carefully and slipped it into his wallet, right behind his black American Express card, 2 pieces of paper representing completely different worlds. He ordered another cup of coffee, then another piece of pie, watching this remarkable child navigate a world that seemed far too heavy for her tiny shoulders. Lucy moved through the diner like a seasoned professional, but Jonathan began noticing things that made his chest tighten with concern. During the dinner rush, Lucy's movements became more frantic. Her small hands struggled with heavy plates, the ceramic dishes looking enormous in her grasp. Twice he saw her wince when lifting the coffee pot, her thin arms trembling with the weight. She nearly dropped a tray of dishes when a customer barked impatiently at her, but she simply smiled and apologized as if the rudeness was her fault. The other waitress, Lucy's mother, he realized, moved even more slowly than before. Sarah Miller was clearly unwell, pausing frequently to catch her breath and steady herself against tables. Her skin had a greyish pallor, and Jonathan noticed how she pressed her hand against her chest when she thought no one was looking. "Mama, you should sit down," Lucy whispered during a brief lull, tugging gently at her mother's apron with genuine worry in her voice. "Can't afford to, baby girl," came the tired reply. Sarah's voice carried the weight of someone fighting battles on multiple fronts. "Bills don't pay themselves, and we're already behind on everything." Jonathan watched as Lucy's face fell slightly before she forced her smile back into place. This child was carrying burdens that would crush most adults, yet she continued serving customers with grace and kindness that seemed to flow from some inexhaustible well of hope. When a businessman in the corner booth snapped his fingers at Lucy and demanded his check sometime today, Jonathan felt his hands clench into fists. Lucy simply hurried over with an apology, never losing her composure even when the man didn't bother to look up from his phone as she spoke. During the evening crowd, Jonathan overheard fragments of conversations that painted a disturbing picture. References to unpaid medical bills, worried whispers about foreclosure notices, and the constant undercurrent of financial desperation that seemed to permeate every aspect of the Miller family's life. When the evening crowd finally thinned, Jonathan approached the counter where Lucy was counting the day's tips with the seriousness of a bank manager. Her small fingers carefully organized the crumpled bills and scattered coins, mostly 1s and 5s, with a few quarters mixed in. The total couldn't have been more than $30. "Lucy," he said softly, not wanting to startle her, "can I ask you something?" She looked up with those bright eyes, and Jonathan noticed the dark circles underneath them, evidence of sleepless nights and adult worries. "Sure. Are you staying in town? Most people just pass through on their way to bigger places, maybe for a few days. I was wondering, do you like working here?" Lucy's smile faltered for just a moment, revealing a flash of exhaustion and sadness before returning full force. "Oh yes. Mama and Daddy need my help. Daddy's real sick and Mama gets tired easy now, the doctor says." She paused, as if remembering she shouldn't share adult worries with strangers. "Anyway, I'm good at helping. Mama says I'm her little angel." "I'm sure you are," Jonathan said, his voice thick with emotion. You're probably the best helper I've ever seen." Lucy beamed at the praise, but Jonathan noticed how she unconsciously rubbed her small feet and how her shoulders sagged when she thought no one was looking. Her small hands showed tiny cuts from handling dishes, and there was a maturity in her eyes that spoke of experiences no 7-year-old should have. As he walked back to his motel that night, Lucy's note burned in his pocket like a secret flame. The neon sign flickered over the parking lot of the Millbrook Motor Inn, and Jonathan realized that, for the first time in years, he had a purpose that had nothing to do with profit margins, market dominance, or board meetings. Sitting in his sparse motel room, surrounded by the simple furnishings that represented everything his penthouse wasn't, Jonathan Reed stared at his reflection in the darkened window. Tomorrow, he would begin figuring out how to help Lucy and her family, but he had no idea how complicated helping a 7-year-old girl could become. Jonathan stared at his laptop screen in the cramped motel room. Lucy's note spread beside the keyboard like a sacred document. The contrast was stark, his top-of-the-line MacBook Pro displaying complicated financial spreadsheets next to a piece of paper that contained more genuine emotion than every business contract he'd ever signed. His first instinct had been simple: write a check, problem solved. In his world, money fixed everything: hostile takeovers, patent disputes, regulatory challenges, all obstacles that fell before the power of his financial resources. But how could someone dressed in thrift store clothes and driving a rented Honda Civic explain a sudden windfall without raising suspicions? He'd spent hours researching the Miller family online, using resources that would have impressed corporate intelligence agencies. David Miller, 34, former factory supervisor at Millbrook Manufacturing. Diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's disease 2 years ago, just 6 months before the plant closure that devastated the local economy. Sarah Miller, 32, former elementary school teacher turned part-time seamstress when her own mysterious illness, something the doctors couldn't definitively diagnose, began affecting her mobility and energy. The medical bills were staggering. Jonathan had seen corporate legal fees that were smaller than what the Miller family owed to various specialists, hospitals, and pharmacies. Even with their modest insurance, the co-pays and uncovered treatments had created a mountain of debt that grew larger every month. The local newspaper's website painted an even grimmer picture of Millbrook itself. The main factory had employed over 800 people before closing. Unemployment had tripled. Small businesses were failing at an alarming rate, leaving empty storefronts throughout the downtown area. Miller's Diner was one of the few remaining family-owned establishments, probably representing the family's last hope of staying afloat financially. Jonathan had built a business empire by solving complex problems, but this felt impossible. Every solution led to more complications. Anonymous donations would be investigated by local authorities suspicious of money laundering. Mysterious benefactors didn't exist in small towns without everyone knowing their business within hours. And if his true identity was discovered, everything would change. Lucy would never look at him the same way again. Her genuine affection would be replaced by the calculated responses he was used to receiving. He called his assistant on his encrypted phone. "Marcus, I need you to research charitable foundations that help families with medical expenses, specifically in Ohio, and I need it done quietly." "Sir, is everything all right? You've been gone 3 days without any scheduled meetings. The board is asking questions about your whereabouts." "Tell the board I'm conducting field research on market conditions in rural America. It's not entirely untrue." Jonathan looked at Lucy's note again. "Sometimes the most important business happens far away from boardrooms. Should I prepare any documentation for tax purposes regarding charitable contributions?" "Not yet. I'm still analyzing the situation." Jonathan paused, realizing how sterile his business language sounded when discussing Lucy's family. "Marcus, have you ever met someone who changed how you see everything?" There was a long pause. "Sir, are you feeling well? You sound different." "Everything's fine, just different." Jonathan touched Lucy's note gently. "Sometimes different is exactly what we need." But as he hung up, a nagging feeling settled in his stomach. In his experience, the most meaningful problems were always the most complicated to solve. The deals that mattered most were the ones where emotions got involved, and emotions made everything unpredictable. The next morning, he returned to the diner with a plan that felt fragile and dangerous. He had identified 3 potential approaches: anonymous donation through a regional foundation, creating a fake contest that the family could win, or somehow manufacturing a situation where he could reveal himself gradually and naturally. Each option carried significant risks. One wrong move, and he could destroy the very thing he was trying to protect, the pure, genuine connection he'd found with Lucy and her family. Lucy greeted him like an old friend, and Jonathan realized he was walking into emotional territory he'd never navigated before. "Daddy had another bad night," Lucy confided to Jonathan during the morning lull, her voice barely above a whisper. She was refilling the salt shakers with the focused concentration of a surgeon, but he could see the worry etched in her young features like lines on an adult's face. Jonathan set down his coffee cup carefully. "I'm sorry to hear that, sweetheart. Is there anything that helps him feel better?" Lucy's small hands stilled, and she glanced around to make sure no other customers could overhear. "The doctors say there's new medicine that might slow down the shaking and help him think clearer. It's called—" Now she scrunched up her face, trying to remember the complex medical term. "Carbidopa levo something, but—" She looked toward the kitchen where her mother was preparing lunch with movements that seemed more labored than the day before. "But what, honey?" "It costs more than we make in 6 months." Mama did the math on her calculator 3 times, and she cried each time. Lucy's voice carried the weight of adult resignation that no child should bear. "She doesn't know I saw her crying, but I did." Jonathan felt his chest constrict painfully. In his world, expensive treatments were simply line items on insurance claims. "What about insurance? Doesn't it cover any of it?" Lucy shook her head, golden curls bouncing sadly. "Daddy lost his job when he got too sick to work safely around the big machines. The company said they were sorry, but they couldn't keep someone who might get hurt. When he lost his job, we lost the good insurance too." She continued organizing salt shakers with mechanical precision. "Now we have the cheap kind that doesn't cover much. Mama says we just have to pray harder and keep working as hard as we can." Before Jonathan could respond, the diner's bell chimed, and a man in an expensive charcoal suit entered. Unlike the usual customers in work clothes, flannel shirts, and casual wear, this newcomer surveyed the restaurant with the calculating eyes of someone conducting business. His leather briefcase and perfectly polished shoes marked him as an outsider in this humble establishment. "Mrs. Miller?" The man approached Sarah with official-looking paperwork in his manicured hand. "I'm Robert Chen from First National Bank. We need to discuss your payment schedule immediately." Jonathan watched Sarah's face drain of color, her hands gripping a coffee pot so tightly her knuckles went white. Lucy instinctively moved closer to her mother, small hands clenched into protective fists despite her size. "Mr. Chen, please!" Sarah's voice trembled like autumn leaves. "Just give us 2 more weeks. The weekend crowd has been better than expected, and we're planning a special Valentine's Day menu that should bring in extra income. I have the numbers right here." "Mrs. Miller, you've requested extensions 4 times in the past 6 months. The bank has been more than patient, considering your circumstances." Chen's voice wasn't particularly unkind, but it carried the finality of someone who had delivered similar news many times before. If we don't receive the full past due amount by this Friday, we'll have no choice but to begin foreclosure proceedings on both the restaurant and your home." "Foreclosure?" Lucy's voice was small and confused, but Jonathan could see the fear creeping into her young eyes as she recognized the gravity in the adult's tones. Sarah knelt beside her daughter, hands shaking as she tried to maintain composure. "It's okay, baby girl. Mama will figure something out. She always does, right?" But Jonathan could see the terror in Sarah's eyes, the look of someone who had run out of options and was staring into an abyss. The woman was clearly ill herself, probably dealing with her own medical issues while trying to care for her husband and keep their business afloat. After Chen left, his business card lying on the counter like a funeral announcement, the diner fell silent except for the soft sound of Sarah crying in the kitchen. She had retreated there to hide her breakdown from customers, but her muffled sobs carried through the service window. Lucy stood frozen in the middle of the restaurant, her usual brightness completely extinguished. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she stared at the spot where the banker had delivered his ultimatum. For the first time since Jonathan had met her, Lucy looked exactly like what she was, a terrified 7-year-old child facing the loss of everything she'd ever known. Jonathan's mind raced through possibilities, calculations, solutions. He had enough money in his personal checking account to solve this family's problems 100 times over. The amount the bank was demanding wouldn't even register as a significant expense in his monthly budget. But every scenario ended the same way. His cover blown, his genuine connection with Lucy transformed into something artificial and complicated. As he watched Lucy quietly clear tables with tears streaming down her face, trying to maintain the routine that kept her family's world turning, Jonathan realized he was facing the most important decision of his life, and he had less than 4 days to figure out how to save a family without destroying what made them special. Jonathan's hands trembled as he filled out the cashier's check at Millbrook's small bank, the pen feeling unnaturally heavy in his grip. $25,000, enough to save the Miller family's restaurant, cover several months of medical expenses for David, and provide a small buffer for unexpected costs. His plan was elegant in its simplicity. Leave the check with an anonymous note claiming it was from a grateful customer who had been touched by the family's kindness and wished to remain unnamed. "That's quite a large amount for our little town," commented Mrs. Henderson, the elderly bank teller, peering over her glasses with the curiosity of someone who had processed the financial transactions of Millbrook residents for over 30 years. "You sure all these numbers are right, honey? Don't want any mistakes with money like this. I've seen folks get in trouble over much smaller amounts." "It's correct," Jonathan assured her, though his palms were sweating despite the cool morning air. "And please, this needs to stay absolutely confidential, banking regulations and all." Mrs. Henderson nodded knowingly. "Oh, I understand completely. We get our share of people who want to help quietly. Small towns like ours, sometimes the left hand shouldn't know what the right hand is doing, if you catch my meaning." But as Jonathan walked toward Miller's diner, the sealed envelope containing the check burning like a coal in his jacket pocket, he spotted Lucy outside the bank building. She was returning from an errand for her mother, a small bag of groceries clutched in her arms and her golden curls catching the afternoon sunlight as she skipped along the sidewalk, humming a tune that sounded like a lullaby. "Jonathan!" she called out, her face lighting up with the pure joy that only children can express. "What are you doing at the bank? Are you opening an account here? Mama says Mr. Henderson's grandson runs it now, and he's much nicer than the old president who used to work there." Panic flashed through Jonathan like lightning. His carefully rehearsed explanation crumbled before he could even attempt it. "Just handling some routine business." Lucy's naturally curious eyes, brightened with intelligence that seemed far beyond her years, noticed the official-looking envelope in his hand. Her expression shifted from casual interest to something more focused. Is that for Mama? Did you talk to Mr. Chen about the bank stuff? He made Mama cry yesterday, and I don't like people who make my Mama cry. Lucy, Jonathan's carefully planned story disintegrated under her innocent but penetrating gaze. This child who had shown him such pure trust deserved honesty, but the truth would fundamentally change everything between them. The genuine friendship they had developed would be forever altered by the revelation of his wealth. Are you rich? The question came out of nowhere, catching Jonathan completely off guard and nearly causing him to drop the envelope. What? Why would you ask something like that? Lucy stepped closer, studying his face with the uncanny perception that only children possess when they sense something important. Lots of little things. Your hands are too soft for someone who does hard work like Daddy used to. Your teeth are too straight and white. Mama says good dental work costs more than our car. And yesterday, you left a $50 tip for a $10 meal and didn't even seem to notice. She paused, her small brow furrowed in deep thought. Plus, Mama told me that sometimes rich people pretend to be regular folks to see how we treat them. She said it happened to her cousin once in Louisville. Jonathan felt the world tilt beneath his feet like a ship in rough seas. This 7-year-old had seen through his carefully constructed disguise when trained business executives, investigative reporters, and corporate rivals never had. Her childlike directness had cut through layers of deception that had cost him thousands of dollars to create. Lucy, let me explain. Are you here to help us? Her voice was small and vulnerable, but filled with a desperate hope that broke his heart into pieces. Because if you are, I need to tell you that we're in really, really big trouble. Bigger than Mama knows, I understand. Jonathan knelt to her level on the sidewalk, the envelope heavy in his hands, like it contained more than money, like it held the power to change everything. Everything he'd planned, every careful strategy, every contingency he'd considered, dissolved in the face of Lucy's direct question, and the trust shining in her young eyes. Yes, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I want to help you more than I've ever wanted anything in my entire life. Lucy's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. Not her usual bright expression, but something deeper and more grateful. I knew it. I prayed every single night that someone would come to help us. I asked God to send someone who would care about Mama and Daddy and make the scary men stop coming to our house with papers. She threw her small arms around his neck with desperate relief. But I never thought it would be someone who would be my friend first. As Jonathan held this brave little girl on a sidewalk in small-town Ohio, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and feeling her small heart beating against his chest, he realized his careful plan had just exploded spectacularly. Lucy knew his secret, which meant everything would change. The dynamic with her family, the complexity of providing help, the inevitable complications that would follow. But looking into her trusting eyes as she pulled back to smile at him, he wondered if maybe that wasn't such a terrible thing after all. How long have you really known? Jonathan asked as he and Lucy sat on the diner's front steps, sharing a piece of her mother's famous apple pie from a single plate. The cashier's check remained sealed in his pocket, but somehow it felt less important now than the conversation unfolding between them. Since yesterday, I think, but I wasn't completely sure until you got all nervous at the bank, Lucy admitted, swinging her small legs from the step. You got the same look Mama gets when she's trying to hide something important from me. Like when she pretends the electric bill isn't scary, or when she says Daddy's medicine isn't that expensive. Jonathan took a deep breath, tasting the cinnamon and apples while gathering courage for complete honesty. Yes, I'm very, very rich, Lucy. More money than your family could spend in several lifetimes. Like movie star rich or like own your own airplane rich? Despite everything, Jonathan laughed, a genuine sound that surprised him. Both. I own 3 airplanes, actually. Lucy considered this information with the seriousness of a judge reviewing evidence. Then why are you dressed like Mr. Peterson, who owns the hardware store? His clothes look just like yours, but he drives that old truck with the squeaky brakes. Because I wanted to know what it felt like to be treated like a regular person instead of a walking dollar sign. In my real life, people are only nice to me because they want something. My money, my influence, my connections. I haven't had a genuine conversation in years. That sounds really, really lonely, Lucy said with the matter-of-fact compassion that only children can deliver without seeming condescending. It is. Lonelier than you could imagine. Jonathan's voice caught as he realized he was sharing feelings he'd never admitted even to himself. Until I walked into your family's diner and met a 7-year-old girl who saw me as just another customer who needed coffee and kindness. Lucy smiled, that same radiant expression that had first captured his heart, but now it carried deeper understanding. You know what I think? I think you're exactly the same, Jonathan, whether you have money or not. You listen to me when other grown-ups ignore kids. You asked about Daddy and didn't change the subject when I talked about scary stuff. You looked at me like I was important. She paused, fork halfway to her mouth. Money didn't make you do that. Your heart did. Jonathan stared at this extraordinary child, wondering how someone so young could possess such profound wisdom about human nature. Lucy, I brought something that could solve your family's immediate problems, he said carefully, pulling out the envelope. But if I help you the way I want to, everything will change. People will treat you differently when they find out you know someone with money. They might not trust your kindness anymore because they'll think it's connected to wealth. Some people will become your friend just to get close to me. Lucy was quiet for a long moment, processing this adult complexity with the focused concentration she usually reserved for her diner duties. Will you still be my real friend if you help us? Not pretend friend or business friend, but the kind who remembers my birthday and asks about my dreams. Always, Jonathan promised without hesitation, and meant it more than any business contract he'd ever signed. Then I don't care what other people think or do. Mama always says that real friends are the ones who stick around when things get scary and hard. She paused, then added with startling insight that made Jonathan's breath catch, maybe this is your chance to find out who your real friends are too. As Lucy spoke, Jonathan realized this 7-year-old had just solved a puzzle he'd been struggling with for years. His fear wasn't really about helping her family. It was about discovering whether anyone in his carefully constructed adult life truly cared about him beyond his bank account and business connections. Okay, he said, placing the envelope between them on the step. But we do this together as real friends. That means honest conversations about everything, the good parts and the complicated parts. Lucy's squeal of joy echoed through the small town streets, causing several neighbors to peer out their windows with amused smiles. She threw her arms around Jonathan again, and for the first time in his adult life, he felt like he was exactly where he belonged. There's just one thing, Lucy said, pulling back with sudden seriousness. We have to tell Mama and Daddy the truth. They taught me that lying is wrong, even when you're trying to help. They deserve to know who you really are before they accept your help. Jonathan nodded, though his stomach clenched with anxiety. You're absolutely right. Do you think they'll understand? Lucy grinned with the confidence that only children possess when they believe in their parents completely. Mama always says that miracles come in all different packages. I think she's going to like your package just fine. As the sun set over Millbrook, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, neither Jonathan nor Lucy realized that their journey was just beginning, and that the real challenges still lay ahead. But for the first time in years, Jonathan Reed wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. The Miller family living room was smaller than Jonathan's walk-in closet, but it radiated more warmth than his entire Manhattan penthouse. Sarah sat on the worn couch, her arm supporting David as his hands trembled from the Parkinson's. Lucy perched between them, clutching Jonathan's sealed envelope like a sacred treasure. "Lucy says you have something important to tell us," Sarah said, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who had weathered too many difficult conversations. "She also says you're not who you seem to be." Jonathan stood in the middle of the cramped space, feeling more nervous than he'd ever been in any boardroom. "Mrs. Miller, Mr. Miller, my name is Jonathan Reed. I'm the CEO and founder of Reed Innovations." He paused, watching their faces for recognition. "I came to your town pretending to be someone else because I wanted to experience genuine human connection without the complications that my wealth usually brings." David's eyes widened slightly. Even through his illness-clouded thinking, the name registered. "Reed Innovations, you're that tech billionaire from the magazines. The one they call the Golden Boy." "I prefer just Jonathan," he said softly. "And I'm here because your daughter showed me something I'd forgotten existed. Genuine kindness without expectation of reward." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God. Lucy, when you said he was rich, I thought maybe he owned a successful business or something." "Not." She gestured helplessly at Jonathan. "Mama, he's still the same person who's been nice to us all week," Lucy interjected with the wisdom of someone far beyond her years. "Money doesn't change who someone is inside." Jonathan knelt in front of the family, placing himself at their eye level. "I know this is overwhelming. I know you have questions and probably concerns about my motivations, but I want you to know that everything I felt when I thought you saw me as a regular customer, that was real. Your kindness, Lucy's friendship, the way you welcomed a stranger, none of that was because of money you didn't know I had." "Why us?" Sarah asked, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Why our family?" "Because Lucy treated me like I mattered when she thought I had nothing to offer her. Because she gave me a note that reminded me what human decency looks like. Because watching your family fight so hard to stay together and stay positive despite impossible circumstances showed me what real strength means." David struggled to speak through his condition, his words slurred but determined. What do you want from us?" "Nothing," Jonathan replied immediately. "I want to give. I want to help. I want to be part of something meaningful for the first time in my adult life." He looked at Lucy, who nodded encouragingly. "This envelope contains $25,000. It's enough to save the restaurant, cover your immediate medical expenses, and give you breathing room to plan for the future." The silence stretched for long minutes. Sarah stared at the envelope as if it might disappear if she blinked. David's trembling hands reached for his wife's, and Lucy watched her parents with the intense focus of a child trying to read adult emotions. "This is too much," Sarah finally whispered. "We can't accept charity on this scale. It wouldn't be right." It's not charity," Jonathan said firmly. "It's an investment in the only genuine friendship I've had in years. It's payment for lessons about humanity that no business school could teach. It's—" He paused, surprised by the emotion in his own voice. "It's what friends do for each other when they have the means to help." Lucy slipped off the couch and took Jonathan's hand. "See, Mama, he's not trying to buy us or change us. He just wants to help because he cares." Sarah looked at her daughter, then at her struggling husband, then at the envelope that represented salvation. "If we accept this, everything changes. People will talk. They'll treat us differently. They'll assume things." "Let them," David managed to say, his voice gaining strength. "Our daughter deserves better than watching her parents slowly lose everything while she works like an adult." Jonathan squeezed Lucy's hand. "I promise you, accepting my help won't change how I see your family or how I hope you see me. But it will change your daily stress, your options, and Lucy's childhood. She'll get to be 7 years old instead of carrying the weight of adult responsibilities." Sarah reached for the envelope with shaking hands. "How do we even begin to thank you?" "You already have," Jonathan replied. "You let a stranger into your lives and showed him what family really means." As Lucy hugged both Jonathan and her parents simultaneously, creating a tangle of arms and tears and laughter, Jonathan realized that giving away money had never felt this significant before. But he also realized their story was just beginning, and that money, while solving some problems, often created entirely new ones. Word traveled through Millbrook with the speed that only small-town gossip could achieve. By the time Jonathan returned to his motel that evening, his phone was buzzing with missed calls from reporters who had somehow tracked his location. The desk clerk, Mrs. Patterson, greeted him with a knowing smile and a stack of message slips. "Quite the stir you've caused, Mr. Reed," she said, emphasizing his real name. "Haven't seen this much excitement since the tornado of '98. The local news van parked outside Miller's diner the next morning was just the beginning. By noon, 3 more news crews had arrived, along with a reporter from a national business magazine and someone claiming to represent a documentary film company. Jonathan found Lucy hiding in the diner's back office, peeking through the blinds at the circus outside. "I don't like all these people with cameras," she whispered when he joined her. "They keep asking me weird questions about you and our family." "What kind of questions?" Like whether you asked us to say nice things about you, or if we knew you were rich all along, and we were just pretending." Lucy's voice trembled with hurt. "One lady asked if Mama made me be extra nice to you because she knew you had money. That made me really mad." Jonathan's jaw clenched. This was exactly what he'd feared, the pure story becoming twisted by cynicism and assumptions. "Lucy, some people can't believe that kindness exists without ulterior motives because they've forgotten how to be genuinely kind themselves." Sarah appeared in the doorway looking overwhelmed. "Jonathan, there are people calling the restaurant asking for interviews. Someone offered us $10,000 just to tell them the real story of how we met you. What does that even mean?" Before Jonathan could answer, David shuffled in, moving better than he had in months thanks to his new medication. "There's a man outside. Says he's from the IRS, wants to discuss our sudden financial windfall." Jonathan felt his stomach drop. "I'll handle the IRS. That's just standard procedure for large financial transactions. But the media attention." He looked out at the growing crowd. "I'm sorry, I never anticipated it would get this invasive." "It's not your fault," Lucy said loyally, but Jonathan could see the stress in her young face. "You were trying to help us." The situation deteriorated throughout the day. Customers who had been regulars for years suddenly seemed suspicious, studying the Miller family with calculating eyes. Jonathan overheard whispered conversations questioning whether the family's financial troubles had been exaggerated, whether they had somehow manipulated him, whether Lucy was too mature for her age in a way that suggested coaching. The worst moment came when Lucy served coffee to a table of local women who had known her since birth. "Well, aren't you the little actress?" one of them said with false sweetness. "I bet you practice that sweet smile just for your rich friend." Lucy's face crumpled, and she fled to the kitchen. Jonathan found her sobbing behind the industrial dishwasher, her small shoulders shaking with a pain that no child should experience. "They think I lied," she cried into his shirt. "They think I was pretending to like you just to get money, but I didn't even know you had money when I wrote you that note." Jonathan held her close, rage building in his chest at the adults who would wound a child with their cynicism. "Lucy, listen to me. The people who matter know the truth. Your parents know, I know, and most importantly, you know who you really are." But what if people always think I'm fake now? What if nobody believes I can be nice just because I want to be nice? It was a question that cut to the heart of Jonathan's own fears about wealth and authentic relationships. Then we prove them wrong by continuing to be exactly who we've always been. The right people will see through the noise. But as Jonathan looked out at the media circus surrounding the diner, he wondered if he had inadvertently destroyed the very thing he'd tried to protect. Lucy's innocence was being dissected by strangers who wouldn't recognize genuine kindness if it served them coffee with a smile. That evening, as he sat alone in his motel room fielding calls from his corporate team about damage control, Jonathan realized that his act of generosity had created consequences he'd never considered. Money had solved the Miller family's immediate problems, but it had also painted a target on their backs. And Lucy, the pure-hearted child who had changed his life, was now paying the price for his wealth in ways that no 7-year-old should have to endure. The question was, how could he protect her from the monster his help had unleashed? 3 days into the media frenzy, Jonathan discovered that someone had leaked private details about his stay in Millbrook to a tabloid journalist. The morning newspaper featured a front-page story titled "Billionaire's Secret Small-Town Romance," with a photograph of him and Lucy sharing pie on the diner's front steps. The headline made his blood run cold, but the implications were far worse. "Romance?" Sarah Miller's voice shook with anger and fear when Jonathan arrived at the diner that morning. "They're implying something sick and wrong about your friendship with my daughter. How dare they?" Jonathan stared at the newspaper, his hands trembling with rage. The article suggested his interest in the Miller family was somehow inappropriate, painting his generosity as potentially predatory behavior. The journalist had interviewed unnamed sources who questioned his motives for befriending a child and spending extended time in a small town where he had no business interests. "We need to respond to this," he said, pulling out his phone to call his legal team. "No." The voice was Lucy's, small but determined. She stood in the diner's entrance, still wearing her school backpack. "That's what they want. They want us to act scared and guilty like we did something wrong." "Lucy, sweetheart, this is different," Sarah began, but Lucy shook her head. "Mrs. Henderson from the bank called Mama this morning. She said 3 different reporters offered her money to say bad things about you, Jonathan. When she wouldn't, they offered her money to say bad things about our family instead." Lucy's young voice carried an anger that didn't belong in a 7-year-old. "They don't care about the truth. They just want a story that sells newspapers." Jonathan knelt to Lucy's level. "This isn't fair to you or your family. Maybe I should leave town until this dies down." "If you leave, they win," Lucy said fiercely. "They get to say you ran away because you were guilty of something, and Mama and Daddy and I have to live with people thinking we're liars or worse." Before anyone could respond, the diner door opened and Robert Chen from the bank entered, his expression grim. But instead of the foreclosure paperwork Jonathan had expected, Chen carried a different folder. "Mrs. Miller, I need to discuss a serious matter with you privately," Chen said, glancing meaningfully at Jonathan. "It concerns your recent financial situation." Sarah's face went pale. "What kind of matter?" Chen hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "The bank has received inquiries from federal investigators about the source of your recent deposit. Large cash transactions are subject to scrutiny under money laundering statutes." He looked directly at Jonathan. "Mr. Reed, your charitable donation has triggered an automatic investigation that I'm legally required to cooperate with." Jonathan's blood ran cold. He had anticipated media attention and community gossip, but a federal investigation could destroy the Miller family, even if they were ultimately cleared of wrongdoing. The legal fees alone could exceed his original donation. "What does this mean for my family?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. It means all your accounts are temporarily frozen, pending investigation. It means you'll need to provide documentation of every transaction for the past 2 years. It means... Chen glanced at Lucy, then chose his words carefully. It means things will get more complicated before they get better. Lucy stepped forward, her small hand finding Jonathan's. Are we in trouble for accepting help? No, sweetheart, Jonathan said, though his mind was racing through legal implications. Sometimes when adults try to help each other adults have to make sure everything was done properly. It's like when your teacher checks your math homework to make sure you didn't make any mistakes. But even as he spoke reassuringly to Lucy, Jonathan knew this was far more serious than homework. Federal investigators didn't care about heartwarming stories or genuine friendships. They cared about patterns, regulations, and potential crimes. That afternoon, 2 FBI agents arrived at the diner, their presence turning the media circus into a feeding frenzy. Jonathan watched from across the street as Lucy pressed her face against the window, her small hands clenched into fists as strangers invaded her family's life. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Board meeting called for tomorrow. Major investors spooked by negative publicity. Stock down 8%. Recommend immediate return to New York for damage control. Jonathan stared at the message, then at the diner where Lucy was bravely serving customers while federal agents questioned her parents. His corporate empire was shaking, his reputation was under assault, and his attempt to help a struggling family had potentially made their situation worse. But as he watched Lucy maintain her courage despite everything falling apart around her, Jonathan realized he had reached a crossroads that would define not just his future, but the kind of man he truly was. The question was no longer whether he could afford to stay and fight for the Miller family. The question was whether he could afford to leave them behind. Jonathan's world exploded during a phone call that shattered everything he thought he knew about loyalty and friendship. The voice on the other end belonged to Marcus Webb, his assistant and confidant of 8 years, but the words coming through the speaker belonged to a stranger. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, Jonathan, but the board voted unanimously. Effective immediately, you're being removed as CEO pending investigation into your judgment and mental stability. Marcus's voice carried no emotion, no regret. The Millbrook situation is being viewed as evidence of a psychological breakdown. Jonathan gripped the phone so tightly he thought it might shatter. Marcus, what the hell are you talking about? What investigation? The board has concerns about your capacity to lead. Disappearing for a week to play house with a small-town family, making impulsive charitable donations that triggered federal scrutiny, associating with people who could be exploiting your emotional vulnerability. Marcus paused. Jonathan, the board thinks you're having some kind of midlife crisis that's compromising your business judgment. You told them about Lucy's family? Jonathan's voice was dangerously quiet. I had to. When FBI agents started calling the corporate offices asking questions about your recent activities, I had a fiduciary responsibility to inform the board about potential liability issues. Jonathan felt the walls of his motel room closing in. So you destroyed a 7-year-old girl's reputation to protect corporate interests. I protected the company that employs 12,000 people from the poor decisions of one man who's clearly lost perspective. Marcus's voice turned cold, professional. The Jonathan Reed I've worked with for 8 years wouldn't have risked everything for a family of strangers. This behavior is erratic and potentially dangerous. The line went dead, leaving Jonathan staring at his phone in stunned silence. In less than 5 minutes, Marcus had stripped away his life's work, his identity, and his future. The company he had built from nothing, the empire that bore his name, was now in the hands of a board that viewed his humanity as a liability. But the betrayal cut deeper than business. Marcus knew about Lucy's note. knew about the genuine connection Jonathan had found with the Miller family. Marcus had seen him laugh for the first time in years, had witnessed the transformation that genuine friendship had brought to his life. And Marcus had weaponized that vulnerability against him. Jonathan's phone buzzed with notifications, news alerts, social media posts, stock price updates. Within an hour, the business world would know that Jonathan Reed had been ousted from his own company. Within a day, the narrative would be set. Troubled billionaire loses grip on reality, makes questionable decisions, removed for everyone's protection. The media circus around Miller's diner would intensify. Lucy and her family, already under federal investigation because of his help, would now be painted as the catalysts for his downfall. The pure friendship that had given his life meaning would be twisted into evidence of mental instability. He had to leave, had to protect the Miller family from further damage. A soft knock interrupted his spiral of panic. Through the motel room's thin door, he heard Lucy's voice. "Jonathan, are you okay? Mama sent me to check on you because you looked sad when you left the diner." Jonathan opened the door to find Lucy standing in the hallway, her golden curls catching the fluorescent light. She carried a paper plate covered with aluminum foil, probably leftovers from the dinner rush. "Lucy, you shouldn't be here alone. It's not safe with all the reporters around. Mrs. Patterson is watching from the front desk, and Mama knows where I am." Lucy studied his face with those perceptive eyes. "You've been crying." Jonathan hadn't even realized tears were streaming down his face. "I'm okay, sweetheart. Just some difficult business news." Lucy pushed past him into the room and set the plate on the small table. "Mama says adults always say they're okay when they're really not. She says it's because they think they have to be strong all the time, but everybody needs help sometimes. Lucy, I think I might have made things worse for your family instead of better. The FBI investigation, the media attention, all the problems." "Stop." Lucy's 7-year-old voice carried surprising authority. "You didn't make those people be mean. You didn't make them tell lies about us. You didn't make them too stupid to see that someone can be kind just because they want to be kind." Jonathan knelt in front of her, this wise child who had somehow become his anchor in a world gone mad. "But because of my help, your family is under investigation. Your parents are stressed. You're being followed by reporters, and now people are questioning whether our friendship is real or fake." Lucy reached up and placed her small hands on either side of his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. "Jonathan Reed, you listen to me. Before you came, we were going to lose everything. Daddy was getting sicker, Mama was getting sicker, and I was scared every single day. Now Daddy has medicine that helps, Mama isn't crying every night about money, and I have the best friend I've ever had. But the investigation will prove we didn't do anything wrong because we didn't do anything wrong." Lucy's voice was fierce with certainty, "and when it's over, the mean people will have to find someone else to bother, and we'll still be friends." Jonathan pulled her into a hug, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and marveling at the strength radiating from such a small person. "How did you get so wise?" Mama says troubles either make you bitter or make you better. I choose better." Lucy pulled back to smile at him. "Besides, if you're not okay, who's going to help me practice my reading?" As Jonathan looked into Lucy's trusting face, he realized that Marcus and the board were wrong about one thing. His judgment had never been clearer. He had lost his company, his fortune was under attack, and his reputation was in ruins. But he had found something infinitely more valuable, a friendship worth fighting for, no matter the cost. The emergency board meeting took place via video conference from Jonathan's cramped motel room. His laptop balanced precariously on the small desk, while 12 stern faces stared at him from the screen. Behind him, through the thin walls, he could hear Lucy's laughter as she played in the motel's small courtyard, with some local children who still saw her as just another kid, not a news story. "Jonathan, we're prepared to offer you a settlement," announced Catherine Morrison, the board's chairwoman and someone he had once considered a friend. "Full severance package, non-compete waiver, and positive references in exchange for your resignation and a commitment to avoid further unconventional behavior that reflects poorly on the company." By unconventional behavior, you mean helping a struggling family. We mean disappearing without notice, making impulsive financial decisions that triggered federal investigations, and associating with individuals who may be exploiting your emotional instability. Morrison's voice carried the cold efficiency of someone cutting losses. "The FBI inquiry alone has cost our stock price 40 points. Jonathan looked around his modest motel room, smaller than his office bathroom in Manhattan, but somehow feeling more like home than anywhere he'd lived in years. "And if I refuse? Then we'll pursue legal action for breach of fiduciary duty, emotional distress inflicted on shareholders, and any other damages our attorneys can substantiate. We'll also ensure that every major media outlet understands the pattern of erratic behavior that led to your removal." The threat was clear: accept exile quietly, or they would wage war not just against him, but against the Miller family's reputation. Lucy would be painted as a manipulative child, her parents as opportunistic con artists, and their genuine friendship as an elaborate scam. "I need time to consider your offer," Jonathan said. "You have until tomorrow morning. After that, our settlement offer expires." Morrison's face disappeared from the screen, followed by the other board members, leaving Jonathan alone with the blue glow of his laptop and the weight of an impossible choice. His phone rang immediately. "Marcus. I hope you'll be reasonable about this, Jonathan. Take the settlement, disappear quietly, let everyone move on with their lives." There was no warmth in Marcus's voice, no acknowledgement of their 8-year partnership. Continuing this charade helps no one. Charade. Jonathan's voice was barely controlled. "Marcus, you've known me for 8 years. Have you ever seen me happier than I've been these past 2 weeks? I've seen you delusional. There's a difference." Marcus paused. "Jonathan, these people don't care about you. They care about what you can provide. The moment your money runs out, they'll forget you ever existed." "You're wrong." "Am I? Test it. Tell them you've lost everything. See how long that little girl keeps writing you notes and bringing you pie." The line went dead, leaving Jonathan with Marcus's poison words echoing in his head. But even as doubt crept in, he remembered Lucy's fierce defense of their friendship, her mother's genuine gratitude, her father's quiet dignity, even in illness. A soft knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Sarah Miller stood in the hallway, her face drawn with exhaustion but her eyes determined. "Jonathan, we need to talk." She entered the room and sat in the single chair, clasping her hands tightly. "I know about the board meeting. I know about the settlement offer. How could you possibly? Small towns have big ears, Mrs. Patterson heard everything through these paper-thin walls. Sarah's voice was steady, but Jonathan could see the cost of her composure. "I'm here to release you from any obligation you feel toward our family." Jonathan felt his heart sink. "Sarah, let me finish." She held up a hand. "The FBI cleared us this afternoon. Turns out their investigation was routine and everything was perfectly legal, but the damage is done. Your company is using us as evidence of your instability. The media is painting my daughter as either a victim or a manipulator." Sarah's voice cracked slightly. "I won't let Lucy pay the price for adult games." "What are you saying?" "Take their settlement. Go back to your old life. Let us go back to ours." Sarah's words came out in a rush, as if she had to say them quickly before losing courage. "We'll always be grateful for what you did, but we can't be the reason you lose everything you worked for. Sarah, that company, that life, none of it mattered until I met your family. But it's your life, Jonathan. These few weeks in Millbrook, they've been wonderful, but they're not reality. Reality is board meetings and corporate responsibility and a world that needs your leadership. Sarah stood to leave. Lucy doesn't understand the adult complications. She thinks friendship conquers everything, but we know better. After Sarah left, Jonathan sat alone in his motel room as the sun set over Millbrook. Through his window, he could see the miller's diner, its warm lights glowing against the gathering darkness. Lucy was probably inside, helping with the dinner rush, still believing that kindness and loyalty could overcome any obstacle. His laptop chimed with an email from his legal team. Settlement papers attached, requires signature by 9 a.m. Eastern tomorrow. Jonathan opened the documents and read through pages of legal language that would restore his fortune, protect his reputation, and send him back to a life of boardrooms and calculated relationships. All it would cost him was the most genuine friendship he'd ever known. As he sat there, pen in hand, Jonathan Reed faced the choice that would define not just his future, but his soul. Comfort and security in the world that had made him wealthy, or uncertainty and struggle in the world that had made him human. Outside, Lucy's laughter echoed through the small-town streets, and Jonathan realized that some decisions couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. They could only be measured in what a man was willing to sacrifice for love. Jonathan stared at the settlement papers spread across his motel room desk, his pen hovering over the signature line that would restore his old life and erase the complications of the past 2 weeks. The documents promised financial security, corporate power, and a return to the carefully controlled world he had known before meeting Lucy Miller. But as he lifted the pen to sign, a small piece of paper fluttered to the floor. Lucy's original note, still tucked between the legal documents where he'd placed it for strength. He bent to retrieve it, reading her childish handwriting once more. "Thank you for being kind to me today. Most grown-ups don't really see me. You looked at me like I mattered. That made my heart happy." The words hit him like lightning, illuminating a truth he had been too blind to see. Jonathan Reed tore the settlement papers in half. 20 minutes later, he knocked on the miller's front door, his heart pounding with the certainty of someone who had finally found his true north. Sarah opened the door with red-rimmed eyes, clearly having spent the evening crying about the impossible situation they all faced. "Jonathan, I told you." "Sarah, I need you and your family to hear something important." His voice carried a conviction that made her step aside. "All of you, including Lucy." David shuffled from the kitchen, supported by his walker, but moving more steadily than Jonathan had ever seen him. Lucy appeared from the hallway in her pajamas, rubbing sleepy eyes but instantly alert when she saw Jonathan's expression. "I just made a decision that some people would call the stupidest choice in business history," Jonathan announced, holding up the torn settlement papers. "I refused my company's offer to buy my silence and restore my fortune." "Jonathan, no," Sarah breathed. "You can't throw your life away for us." "I'm not throwing it away. I'm choosing what kind of life I actually want to live." Jonathan knelt in front of Lucy, taking her small hands in his. "Lucy, do you remember what you wrote in your note about how I looked at you like you mattered?" Lucy nodded solemnly. "Well, you and your parents looked at me like I mattered too. Not my money, not my success, just me. And that's worth more than any company or bank account." Jonathan's voice grew stronger with each word. "I'd rather be poor with friends who love me than rich with people who only care about what I can give them." "But what will you do?" David asked, his words clearer than usual. "How will you live?" Jonathan smiled, feeling lighter than he had in years. "I'm going to start over. Maybe open a small business here in Millbrook. Maybe learn what it's like to build something meaningful instead of just profitable." He looked around at the modest living room that had become more precious to him than any boardroom. "And I am going to be the friend to Lucy that she's been to me." Lucy launched herself into his arms with a squeal of joy that echoed through the small house. "You're staying? Really staying?" "Really staying, if you'll have me." But the next morning brought a shock that no one had anticipated. Jonathan's phone rang at dawn with a call from an unexpected source, Mrs. Henderson from the bank. "Mr. Reed, you need to get down here right away. Something extraordinary is happening." At the bank, Jonathan found a line of people stretching around the block. Business owners, farmers, teachers, retirees, the entire population of Millbrook seemed to be gathered outside the modest building. Mrs. Henderson met him at the door, her elderly face beaming with excitement. "Word got out about what you chose to give up for the Miller family," she said, ushering him inside. "People started talking about what real friendship means, what community means, and then—" She gestured to a stack of checks and cash on her desk. "They started donating." Jonathan stared at the money in confusion. "Donating to what?" "To you." Mrs. Henderson's voice cracked with emotion. "Every person in this town who's ever been helped by the Miller family, and honey, that's just about everyone, decided to return the favor. They're pooling their resources to help you start a new life here." Lucy and her parents arrived just as the crowd outside began to cheer. Through the bank's windows, Jonathan could see people holding homemade signs. "Thank you for choosing love. Real friends don't have price tags. And welcome home, Jonathan." "I don't understand," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. Mrs. Patterson from the motel pushed through the crowd with an announcement that left everyone stunned. The local paper just got a call from 60 Minutes. They want to do a story about what happens when someone chooses humanity over profit. They're calling it the Millbrook Miracle. But the biggest surprise came when Lucy tugged on Jonathan's sleeve and pointed toward the street. A familiar figure was walking toward the bank. Marcus, looking disheveled and uncertain. "I saw the news coverage," Marcus said when he reached them, his voice barely audible above the crowd's excitement. "I saw what you chose to give up and I realized." He paused, struggling with words. "Jonathan, in 8 years of working together, I never once saw you smile the way you've been smiling in these news reports." "Marcus, let me finish. The board was wrong. I was wrong. You didn't lose your mind in Millbrook. You found your heart." Marcus reached into his briefcase and pulled out official documents. "I convinced 3 major investors to break with the board. We're prepared to back your new venture, whatever it is, with complete creative and operational control." Jonathan shook his head slowly. "Marcus, I appreciate the gesture, but I don't want my old life back. That's not what I'm offering. I'm offering to help you build a new one." Marcus looked around at the crowd of ordinary people who had rallied behind Jonathan's choice. "Whatever you want to create here, in this place that taught you what really matters, we want to be part of it." As Jonathan stood in the middle of Millbrook's main street, surrounded by people who had chosen to see the best in him, holding Lucy's hand while her parents beamed with pride, he realized that his greatest fear had been backwards all along. He had worried that people only loved him for his money. But the truth was more beautiful. When he chose love over money, real love found him. 6 months later, Jonathan Reed, now co-owner of Miller's Diner and founder of the Millbrook Community Development Fund, stood watching Lucy serve coffee to customers with the same radiant smile that had changed his life. The diner was busier than ever, filled with visitors who had heard the story and wanted to experience the place where a billionaire had chosen friendship over fortune. But every morning before the crowd arrived, Jonathan and Lucy still shared a piece of apple pie on the front steps and talked about dreams, kindness, and the magical truth that the best treasures in life can't be bought. They can only be given freely, received gratefully, and cherished forever. Lucy's note still sat in Jonathan's wallet, but now it was accompanied by dozens of others from people whose lives had been touched by their story. Each one reminded him of the same beautiful truth. When you look at someone like they matter, they look back at you the same way. And that, Jonathan Reed had learned, was the only wealth that truly mattered.